Good morning, everyone. It is Monday, August 17th. This is your asynchronous lesson and assignment for today. I am Mr. South, for those of you who don't know me. If you're wondering why I'm the one on your screen, if you have Miss A, Miss D, or Miss Cox, it's because we are a team of AmStud teachers, and so we work together very closely to provide everyone the same experience. So just a quick introduction, you have Miss DeVilliers, also known as Miss D, Miss Cox, also known as Miss Cox, Miss Alexander, also known as Miss A, as that have three sections between the three of them, and then Miss Bauer and myself have the other three sections. So we look forward to hopefully meeting all of you in some way, even if, whenever we're back at school, we're kind of in and out of each other's rooms. So don't be shy. Come say hello to us because we're all part of the same team. Now, this is a brief introduction to how we want you all to approach a lot of the things that you're going to come into contact with during this course, primarily with primary documents. So everybody, quick refresher, right? Primary documents, photographs, people who were at a speech and wrote things down, anything that, we'll just say a very quick definition right now. Primary document is like something that was recorded about an event in which the person was very close to the actual happening of that event. Okay. Textbook, secondary source, just to get that out of the way. Now, historiography. Our definition for this: the writing of history based on the critical examination of sources, the selection of particular details from the authentic materials in those sources, and the synthesis of those details into a narrative that stands the test of critical examination. The term historiography also refers to the theory and history of historical writing. Now, this is what you're doing with primary sources, right? Especially whenever you are writing things like essays that are using primary sources to support your writing. So being critical of the sources, pulling out the details to support your argument, and then crafting all of that together in a story. Story is just a simplified way of saying narrative, right? That someone could look at very critically and get everything that they needed to know and know that this is a trustworthy assessment of those documents that you put together. Okay, so just keep in mind with this that the primary sources that you see are written by real people, right? It's not that they are just to be taken at 100% truth and that's the way it was and that's the only perspective, right? Because there's many perspectives. Just for example, if 5 Trump supporters and 5 Biden supporters were traveling together and they all 10 went to a Trump rally and then they all 10 went to a Biden rally, and then you were asked them to write about their experiences with both, that you would have different tones. You would have different points of view. People would be critical about different things. They might not mention, like whenever their candidate kind of stumbled over his words or things like that. And so you have to keep those bias in mind, like who is writing this, what's their perspective, is there something that they would like the reader not to know, right? Because it makes them look bad or it makes their party look bad or things like that. So keep that in mind, that everyone has an angle, right? Everyone has some version of the story that they are telling, that there might be another version, and so you have to be critical of that and be aware. Okay, everyone is looking at the world through their lens, and so you need to pay attention to what their lens might be to help you accurately and critically examine what they're saying. Another thing that we need to talk about is myth. So right at first you might be thinking, why are we talking about Zeus, like Greek mythology, or Thor with Norse mythology, right? Not exactly, but that is myth, yes. And we'll talk about how it applies to American history specifically. So, myth being a self and symbolic narrative, usually of unknown origin and at least partly traditional, that ostensibly conveys actual events and that is especially associated with religious belief. For those of you like me who need a reminder of what ostensibly means, it's basically apparently, but not actually. Okay, so stories that are told that are attached to a people or a culture, but that probably didn't happen, right? Um, in American culture, it's not so much associated with, it's not as easy to tie it to a religious belief as, say, Greek or Norse mythology, because those were their gods, right? That they worshipped and were very much part of their culture, but still very much a part of the American story are, say, like our founding fathers. Those are the ones, people that we're going to talk about and use as our examples today. They are maybe not so much religious figures, but they are very, very ingrained in the tradition. So whenever you have those American figures, um, and that myth, you might be thinking, well, we just have history. Why do we need myth? Think of George Washington chopping down the cherry tree, right? People at the time of George Washington, uh, they already loved him, and he was already an American icon. But then you have these stories come along where he chops down his father's cherry tree, and then his father comes and asks him, "Hey, did you do this?" And he's like, "Yes, father, because I can never tell a lie." And that story gets attached to the history and the story of, what George Washington, what people actually saw him do, and it just makes him even that much greater, right? So then after that story circulates around, becomes part of the myth and the history of George Washington, it just kind of builds and builds into something that, um, George Washington himself would be like, well, that never happened. So myth can be a funny thing, but it is very much a part of the culture. Um, Now, if you consider these founding fathers as American myths, uh, we have George Washington here, right? He probably wasn't Captain Morganing across the Delaware during the Revolutionary War. This almost looks like he's this divine being that's like bringing light with his actions, right? It's taking a story and adding that element of myth and mysticism to it. And then we have people like Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson did some wonderful things for the country. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, and Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the country. And so these people are remembered, and they start generating this like myth aura because of the things that they do. And we learn about them from their actions that are recorded and the things that they write and leave behind, and policy and things like that. So whenever we think about George Washington, one of the things we think about that he leaves behind and becomes part of his story is the peaceful transfer of power, right? Here we have outgoing President Obama, incoming Donald Trump. We probably wouldn't expect these two to be just the best of friends, given the way they've been critical of one another, talked about each other on the campaign trail, and things like that. But here we have, because of Washington serving two terms and stepping down and saying that we need to allow others to, and like have this constant cycling of power at the seat of the presidency. Right? Nobody should just like be president forever. I'm not a king. We have this precedent set of peaceful transfer of power. You might say, well, that's just how it is. And my answer to that is, well, that's how it is because of George Washington's precedent, an example that he set. So another thing that we have, like I said earlier, with Louisiana Purchase, wasn't technically constitutional, what Jefferson does, but he doubles the size of the United States with the purchase of Louisiana Territory. Um, Now, we also have this new addition to American myth with Alexander Hamilton. Before the musical Hamilton, if you were reading about Hamilton in a textbook, you'd probably say, like, he was in Washington's cabinet, Secretary of the Treasury, the He was all about the Bank of the United States. He wanted the federal bank. He had this kind of feud with Thomas Jefferson. Maybe that might get brought up a little bit, but other than that, it'd be like, and then he dueled Aaron Burr, and then he died, right? But now, thanks to the musical Hamilton, you have this like, if you ask people, what do you think about Alexander Hamilton? They probably like, at least fans of the musical would like get all bright eyed and be like, oh my God, he was this great guy. Talking about him like they knew him, and that's what myth does. It takes this person who we just read about on paper, and we say, well, that's cool, but they're really, really dead, right? There's like a long time ago, and now all of a sudden they inspire you, and you just love how whenever he said, and you're like, wait, this guy's dead, right? It's like they're talking about him like they knew him, and it's because of this myth and this cultural icon that he has become through the musical Hamilton. So, real quick, I want you to go to YouTube, type in "Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story." It is the last musical number of the musical Hamilton. And this concept that Lin-Manuel creates in this piece it's what history is, right? It's something that you should always remember that, and this is George Washington's character who starts off in this, and he um, puts it wonderfully that you have no control who lives, who dies, who tells your story, right? And so remember that the history that is crafted that we have in our textbooks and things like that, we have because certain people wrote it down and told the story. And so that's how we remember it. Sometimes we change history because we learn that, ooh, that version of the story maybe wasn't the whole truth, right? So take a listen to that. It's 3 minutes. Then pause this and then come right back. All right, so now that you're back, what is next? You're going to go to Google Classroom. These are your two things you have to do today. You're going to go under the Classwork tab, click on Week 2, find the Declaration of Independence document. It is the complete document minus the grievances. Now, what you're going to do with this is you're going to mark it up. You're going to annotate it and take notes as you read, okay? That's it. We will discuss this next time we're doing synchronous learning in class. Don't submit this assignment in Google Classroom. Just don't click turn in, just leave it with your notes and stuff on it. Okay, the reason is we think if you turn it in, then you won't be able to see your notes whenever we're discussing it in class, and that's what we need to do with it, right? So just leave it unsubmitted, right? Now, the other thing is there's a writing prompt in connection with the declaration reading, and you are going to read the prompt and set a 10 to 15 minute timer for yourself, type it under the prompt, and then submit it, right? After that 10 to 15 minutes, you're done. Just do it, move on with your day, step away from a screen, do what you got to do, right? This one you turn in, this is how you're being counted. This is how attendance is being taken for Monday, right? So make sure you turn this in whenever you're done. And that should wrap it up for you on this asynchronous day. Hope you have a good rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you virtually during your synchronous times. Email us if you have any questions. Till next time.